Tonight, I'm excited to introduce our speaker. Marta Anderson Szomor is a strategic IT consultant who has 18 years of experience supporting client needs within healthcare, water, and new energies. Marta is passionate about technology and community-scaled individual wellness. Currently, she is working on research through her research and development firm, Intellect Earth, which is dedicated to the advancement of agrivoltaics, which is agriculture co-located with solar panels, also known as APV. Addressing agrivoltaics solutions with a focus on clean tech, Marta and her team have built Intellect Earth's TELUS APV monitoring system and are getting ready for its first deployments this summer. APV works to enhance the ecosystem flow of services surrounding agriculture, energy, and water. And Intellect Earth works to understand the environment, monetary, and social benefits of agrivoltaics in Minnesota's communities using extensive data collection and building for drone technology, automated data monitoring, and agriculture insight assistance. Sounds very interesting and a lot of new information, I'm sure, for most of us. Welcome, Marta.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you all for having me today to speak. We are still very much in our research and development phase, so we're very excited to be able to share this with you a little bit early. We are working on some educational programs and community education, which we'll be releasing early in 2024. So this is my first public speaking engagement on this topic, so it should be pretty interesting. Because it is a large topic. It is also a topic that I have been working in for about 3 years, which means I still have a lot to learn as well. And it is my first time working within the field of agriculture. So while I am not new to new energies, I am new to agriculture, and that is a giant field on its own, which is why it's going to be wonderful to be speaking to this audience today, because I'm going to go ahead and do a number of discussion breaks rather than the 15-minute break at the end. So we'll have some opportunity to get your insights. I think I can learn just as much from this audience as I can provide to you. So a little bit about my background. So I am, let's say, the owner and manager of a small research firm, as Rachel said. So we're in a research and development firm. We partnered with the University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment and have run some internship programs, both with graduate and undergraduate students. So we have been modeling different solar sites that we have taken samples from throughout the state of Minnesota. So we've taken samples from 18 different sites, and we've done modeling for the majority of those sites. And in addition to that, we have worked with some local solar developers and utilities to scout their sites. Unfortunately, it hasn't been until this year, we had hoped it would be last year, that we are able to start a pilot program and run both the methodologies that we have identified for planting, as well as run our drone technology, which is in its monitoring phase. So run our drone technology for ground truthing, after which it won't need any in-ground equipment, so that'll make it much less invasive for the agriculture itself. You won't have to be trimming your plants anymore to get an idea of how healthy they are. You're not going to have to be going in. I think the only thing you'll really have to keep an eye on that we can't gain from the drone is our soil sampling. And even some of that the drone can read. So we've really come a long way with that. So I could probably tell you a lot more about plants going in the reverse order of how they are censored and how we read them from a sensor to how they work as a plant. And let's see. So we might as well jump into this and just see how many people here are familiar with agrivoltaics as a practice. Not a few people? All right. Well, that's good to hear. So agrivoltaics is a simple idea. It is simply the dual land use of agriculture and solar. So putting solar and agriculture together. Most people think of solar arrays as being the ones that we see here that are very low to the ground. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too, because we're going to be working on both existing and new solar sites, which is something that is debatable within the academic field, but has proven very successful in our modeling. So when we get into some topics of agroforestry and how it's traditionally used in agrivoltaics, which is funny because a lot of people say agrivoltaics is a new technology or a new innovation, but it's not. So we are looking to use agroforestry throughout the Midwest a little bit more fluently within agrivoltaics than in other regions that have to have those upper panels that are raised from the ground a little bit more to allow for more sun space and more spacing through the panels. So we'll go to, kind of our agenda here. So we'll do an introduction to what agrivoltaics is. And I do have a short video, which is not from us. It is from Oregon State University and Chad Higgins, who works on the Inspire project. If anybody is familiar with that, that is our only agrivoltaics project within the United States right now. They're doing a wonderful job. We have over 9, maybe 10 test sites with that. The University of Minnesota was involved in putting together a lot of the technology portions of the Inspire program. So when you're looking at pollinator habitats that are underneath solar panels, which we have a lot of in Minnesota, thanks to a voluntary pledge, we have a little bit of policy surrounding that that came out in 2016. So if you see any of those restored solar sites that have grasses under them or beekeeping equipment or anything like that, we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more. And then, current trends. So those would be worldwide. And then how to advance this practice a little bit more in the United States. There have been advancements throughout the world that are now commercial and running very well. But the U.S. and especially the U.S. Midwest has been a little bit more hesitant. As I don't know how many people in this room hear this saying a lot, but if a practice can make it in the United States, it can make it anywhere in the world. It is a tough market. It is tough to change. But we are getting there, and it is definitely going in a positive direction. So we'll go through some of those current trends and how we are advancing in the United States and what we can do on the ground here to make these projects a little bit more accessible and a little bit more prominent. So then also we'll go into kind of the fun part, which is planting models and best practices, things we've come up with through our models and a lot of our lab studies, greenhouse studies. So a lot of those. So we'll go through best practices, different growing techniques that are specific to Minnesota, and then our technology and implementation, which is data monitoring. So I know a lot of you are familiar with sustainable agriculture and may or may not have noticed that data insight technology has come out for a lot of different types of agriculture and agricultural monitoring, but not for sustainable agriculture. There isn't a program yet or a central database or a data collection for sustainable agriculture in the same way that we have for organic or traditional agriculture. And so starting with collecting this data and obviously combining it with others that are doing the same thing and willing to share. And there are a few that aren't, but those that are willing to share is going to be, I think, very helpful in pushing this forward as an easy to use practice or an easy to implement practice. As we gather data from all of these different test sites, it will be able to digest that and make it easier to plan these projects for different areas and different sites. So hopefully we'll have enough time for all of that. But if we do go down a rabbit hole into a discussion area that is very interesting to this audience, that works for me as well. So co-locating agriculture and solar. This goes through kind of the few, which is the food, water, and energy benefits of agrivoltaics. So basically it shows you vegetables and crops share the land with solar panels. Shaded plants need less water, so we'll get into that too. It is definitely huge in water savings. And then it also creates a symbiotic relationship in that it makes the solar panels themselves more efficient by cooling the back and allowing them to absorb more sunlight. So we'll go ahead and watch this. It's less than 5 minutes.
Agriculture uses an enormous amount of resources. It takes a lot of water and energy to grow our food. 85% of the global water resource consumption is used for irrigation, and 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to agriculture. At the same time, demand for food is only growing. The global population, currently at 7.5 billion, is estimated to reach 9.8 billion by 2050. We will need to nearly double our current food production to meet that demand. We will also need to improve access to food, reduce food waste, and address inequities related to food deserts. Food is complicated, and an approach to a dynamic and sustainable food system is multifaceted. Let's focus on the future production and resource management side of the equation. Looking at the water issue alone, with the current agricultural methods, there will be nowhere near enough water to grow the needed level of food production by 2050. And we are all aware of the high cost of fossil fuels on our wallets and on the environment. If the status quo remains, we will likely be looking at food shortages, which in turn could cause social unrest and potential economic collapse. Agriculture has always adapted to meet the dynamic needs of a changing society. Innovations in technology have driven incredible progress over time, from tractors and pest management to breeding and genomics. Most growers are accustomed to exploring new methods of addressing emerging challenges in agriculture and continue to look for ways to mitigate risks brought on by a changing climate. Water, energy, and agriculture are the bedrock of modern civilization. And while many technologies have advanced these components separately, few have aimed to address all three components at once. It is time to step back and reimagine their relationship. Enter agrivoltaics. This new technology promises to improve food production and reduce water use, while also creating energy and additional revenue. The solar panels are placed on the same land where crops are grown, allowing growers to harvest the power of the sun twice. A recent OSU study estimates that converting just 1% of American farmland to agrivoltaics could meet our national renewable energy targets and save water and create a sustainable long-term food system. It will also create new revenue opportunities for family farms which are currently facing increased economic challenges, with a 23% increase in bankruptcy filings over the past year. The solar panels also help plants grow more efficiently by needing less water. See, plants have an upper limit on how much sun they can actually use. It's called the light saturation point. Beyond that point, any additional sun doesn't increase photosynthesis. It doesn't help the plant grow. It simply increases the plant's water demand. It makes the plants sweat, and it makes them more thirsty. Solar panels can be positioned to allow plants just the right amount of sunlight. And then the excess sunlight can be harvested for electricity and produce more electricity than they would without crops below them. The plants help keep solar panels cool, which makes them more productive. Our studies have shown that panels positioned above plants produce up to 10% more electricity. Agrivoltaics is a symbiotic relationship where both the solar panels and the crops benefit because they help each other perform better. The electricity can be used to run the farm with electric tractors and equipment, and to power precision ag technology that helps further reduce water usage. Surplus energy can be stored in battery banks or sent to the grid for consumer use. It's a win-win-win relationship between the three most foundational elements of modern life: food, water, and energy. We are creating a model of the sustainable farming system at OSU's North Willamette Research and Extension Center in Aurora, Oregon. The 5-acre model is expected to be fully functional by fall 2021. Our current projection estimates that converting 1% of American farmland to agrivoltaics would cost an initial investment of around 1% of the federal budget and would be paid for in energy savings within 14 years. More importantly, it would help meet future demand by growing more food and using less water, while also creating sustainable energy at the same time. This type of systems thinking approach is the only way to solve the intertwined issues of long-term sustainable farming, energy production, and water conservation. And it's how the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University is working to make tomorrow better.
I've had the opportunity to speak with Chad Higgins and Eric Lonsdorf, who had a lot to do with the technology portions of the Inspire project. So from here, they went through some of the benefits in that video of agrivoltaics, and I think we can all see that there would be an extension of those benefits that would go quite far. So some of these things I just listed quickly were local food sourcing, soil restoration, ensures soil ecosystem support, promotes environmental sustainability for local habitats, including local communities. And it addresses multiple public health issues. So there are some things, well, now I just thought of an article and I really wish I had a reference for it on this slide, but I can always get one to you. So I'm going to bring it up anyway, because it was interesting. An article that I read last year, there was a study in, I believe it was China or Korea, and most likely Korea, since they're the ones who have moved pretty heavily on policy in the last 2 years. But they had done a study on broccoli underneath solar panels, and they went to, I'm not sure, a handful of small producers and did some with solar and did some without. And the ones with solar actually came out a much darker color and much more nutritional and higher nutritional value than the ones that were not done under solar panels. So I think that is very interesting on how this may change how we look at some of our vegetables as well, our growing techniques and some other things like that. So here's kind of just a wrap up. Co-locating agriculture and solar is basically being eco-aware. This is ecologically friendly. This is climate smart. So we're going to be installing solar. We might as well be installing smart solar. Solar that does not monopolize our land use or monopolize our farmland. Smart solar should enhance farm viability. It should protect most productive farmland, increase clean energy, and really promote and provide a pathway for sustainable farming to become a much larger practice. And then sustainable farming, as we all know, helps restore depleted soil, improves water use efficiency, increases clean water availability, promotes biodiversity, and maintains or increases many crops' nutritional value. And this is a big topic. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because I do want to get into the growing techniques, but the huge topic of agrivoltaics and climate change. We can see from that, well, we know that solar will be expanding. We need at least 10 million additional acres of solar to reach our 2050 goals and for the US 2050 goals. And APV increases the value of solar. The interesting part here is if you take a look at this 2021 map on the top, that kind of shows our most productive farmland, with the red being most productive and the white being least. And you don't see a lot of white spots within the US. And you certainly don't see a lot within the US Midwest. We've got some pretty decent growing conditions, and the West in general does as well there in California and kind of a little bit south of what we consider the Midwest. So if you look at the agricultural yield change map, and I'm sorry, this is not in the same colors, it would have made it easier, but you get an idea of how this is going to change. This is showing a map of, let's see, 2060. So this is what it will look like in 2060 with no climate change mitigations. And that's kind of covering the screen there, but that is showing in percentages. The colors are shown in percentages on how much they're going to be changing, either up or down. So obviously green is good. And as you get into the red, that's changing drastically to a very low yield. Where we see a lot of agriculture today in California, and especially you see Minnesota getting depleted very, very, quickly, Iowa as well. So this is why I think, agrivoltaics is an important practice to start pushing in the Midwest, not only because it is my home, but also because we are at a critical point here in climate change and where we're headed as an agricultural state. So let's see. Yeah, APV can help solve these large climate issues and really mitigate kind of the worst of them when it comes to agriculture stability. So that is where we are at with climate change. I could go on this subject for quite some time, and apparently I wanted to. So we'll go one more quick slide. So this also is a different measure, and this shows where solar is most available in the United States. And as you can see, that goes towards warmer regions. So we've got a lot of solar that looks great in Arizona, the Southwest, really New Mexico, California. But as temperatures increase, the solar panels will not be as durable. The solar panels that we have today, really anything over 80 degrees when they're sitting there is really going to be harmful. They're going to degrade a lot faster. They're going to have a lot more outages and not working. There's going to be a lot more maintenance to put in, and they're going to die out sooner and need to be replaced and at a very high cost. So we do want to see increased solar in this upper Midwest region. And we do want to see agrivoltaics, increase into that Southwest region as well. So we can keep our solar farms down there, as well as some of their, agricultural land. Okay, so that was brief, but there. So who is agrivoltaics good for? And that is a really good question. So it is rural communities, smallholder producers. You can kind of go through that list. All of these are things we've done some pretty deep dives into aside from ranching. So I did put in a slide on ranching with solar because I've done a little bit of research into it, but it is not our primary objective is vegetable crops and edible crops. But this is a good strategy as well for solars. There is really three types of agrivoltaics. And one is, just restoring the ecosystem. So restoring that natural habitat. The next would be solar grazing. So putting in pasture lands and having animals to graze there. And then the next is crops and growing edible vegetables and food sourcing. And here we go. So we have natural ecosystems. This kind of just shows you the benefits and how they grow as you get into a full APV system. So you can just kind of take a quick look at that. When you just do a solar site, all you have is a small amount of energy production compared to the energy production you could have with a full APV site, or even the energy production you get with simply a restored natural ecosystem underneath that, or a pasture land or grazing land. So this is a quick slide on solar grazing. As I said, I don't know too much about the ranching industry, and I haven't delved into a lot of this research, but it is a very viable option, and it is still doing that dual use. We are not, taking to new land or new practices, but it does lead to healthier animals overall, and we can do this with, really three different types. This is not something that's really great for chickens or pigs. This is good for really sheep, goats, cows. I've heard people have tried this with alpacas, but it was not a big hit. They didn't care whether they were shaded or not. And then goats can handle only upper panels because they do climb and chew. But otherwise, they are fine for pasture land as long as your panels are high enough. So we can get into sustainable no-till agriculture. So that is what we are going for all of our panels. A lot of farmers and a lot of videos that you may watch on agrivoltaics do say that panels should be vertical and spaced further apart. Some say panels should be high and bifacial so they can rotate with the sun. It really is site specific. Now, ideally, yes, we would want to put in panels that would be most symbiotic to the plants that we're planting. But oftentimes we don't have a choice if we're working with something that is already installed. So yeah, the things that you see here are definitely for agrivoltaics, bifacial panels. Some of these are to keep traditional practices going so people can run tractors through them so they don't have to go through any kind of major transition either, and will be able to keep their crops going while this is installed. And then you have others like this, where it is, the solar panels are raised high above so that they can do a variety of different types of crops. That is probably very good for a testing site. And this last one here is like a greenhouse environment. And those are very interesting. They have been done across vineyards, as well. We focus mostly on open air rather than greenhouse. So even when we have looked at vineyards and those are raspberries, I think, but even when we've been looking at things like orchards or vineyards, we've been looking at open air ideation for that here in Minnesota. Although greenhouses are a wonderful idea, and I know many people use them during the winters, so that is something we would love to get into at a later stage. So this is our goals for just Intellect Earth. What we would like to do, is complete our operational studies between 2023 and 2025 for some ongoing community education starting in 2024. So we're working on putting those together now, and all of that is going to go onto an online platform that will just be open to the public, along with data that was gathered from our operational studies and the modeling that we have done so far. And then, yes, we would like to move on to implement APV in farms starting in 2025. We opened as the first agrivoltaics consulting firm in the United States. There are now 3. So aside from us, our two other friends in different regions, and the Inspire program, there are not a lot of people who are pushing for these pilot programs. And I think we can do a lot on a community level and a community scale to push these pilot programs, which will then push policy. And that will help a lot in terms of collaborations. But I think just putting the right teams together at this stage and getting them going. So whether that is a landowner who already has community solar, or it is a utility that has a community solar program, or some developers have community solar programs, getting one of them on board, maybe some some agricultural specialists, and so farm management and planning, or or a company like ours would come in and help with farm planning. And as I said, it can go, we believe that this can work with either new or existing solar sites. So I'll be able to show you some of those models a little bit later in the presentation. So some trends worldwide. Agrivoltaics has experienced a lot of rapid growth in recent years. The Fraunhofer Institute in Germany is widely considered the the father of agrivoltaics, claiming to have invented agrivoltaics back in the 70s. Slightly debated, but not too much. They have been doing a large amount of work on that and continually studying since the 1970s. Their work has never dropped off. So that is very interesting. So world generation from agrivoltaics has increased from 2.9 to 14 gigawatts in 2021. And then some of these are fairly new. National funding programs have been established in Japan was the first, China, France, and then really new, Israel, Netherlands, and Korea are all in the last 2 years. And I think Korea is doing a particularly good job. That's why I put that in there. And so is the Netherlands. They have a lot of pilot programs going, and they are a small country. And it is specifically because they are the second largest food exporter in the world, despite their small size. So they are very ramped up on their testing. It's very coordinated, very organized, and they have a lot of data coming out of there. And then, Korea is planning an additional 100,000 agrivoltaic systems on farms as a retirement provision for farmers, which I think is a wonderful idea. It allows the farm to keep running from whoever is still going to be managing that, and it allows that passive income to start coming in, and then the farm will end up being more productive. So here's agrivoltaics in the United States right now. The top picture shows solar installations that have some form of agrivoltaics on there. You can see in Minnesota, there is that huge cluster of bees. This comes from the Inspire program, the MAPS too. And so those are all of our pollinator sites. So those are sites that have been restored. And that is really thanks to that 2016 voluntary pledge that was passed through Minnesota. A lot of utilities and communities really liked that idea and really pushed for it. So I think once we see some policy changes around planting crops, we will see the same kind of explosion underneath our solar arrays with crops as we did with bees, or pollinator habitat, excuse me. But yes. And so these projects that are around the United States, you can see the new one in Oregon that they were just talking about, are, just basically show that agrivoltaics has potential for a large number of regions. And there is actually a new one in Michigan that is not on this map. So there's a new one in Michigan, and then one that's coming this year in Illinois, which is very big. I don't remember what it was that passed there last year, what it was called, but it did allow for some agrivoltaics, specifically agrivoltaic studies. So I think that's going to be interesting, because that is getting pretty close to home there with Michigan and Illinois jumping on board. I think we're going to see a lot less resistance from farmers, and we'll be able to jump into community education and some pilot programs with good results, good social feedback. So although small, as I said, the variety of states exploring agrivoltaics shows that the practice has nationwide potential. So we've got Colorado, Oregon, Massachusetts, Arizona, California, Michigan, and Illinois. All right, I got them in there. So this talks just a little bit about some of the benefits to all U.S. regions. Microclimates created underneath panels and agrivoltaic systems can sustain plant species that are normally not viable in a region. So that allows farmers to diversify their crops. As a potential weapon against desertification, agrivoltaics can enable new and continued farming at a time when the industry is losing both farmers and cropland. And so this one goes over some of the more, the broader benefits. And so this helps reduce the conversion of farmland, because it is not converting the farmland. We are simply dual purposing that farmland. So we're not taking that away. We're just transitioning it into a different type of farming. So let's see, I can't read my own slide there, but if everybody has kind of gone through that, APV just provides sustainable access basically to food, water, and electricity. And it has a large effect on farming communities, which tend to be a little bit lower in income and are definitely at higher risk for climate change disaster. So this would bring in both jobs and really mitigate a lot of the climate risks that those communities are facing. All right, so these are some of the things that we have to deal with in the United States right now. There's the number one, the not in my backyard, and that is mostly related to solar. But then when we bring up APV, people mostly think of solar. They don't think about the agriculture first. They think about the large solar panels. But the recent study in 2022 showed that public support for solar development increases when agricultural production is combined. So we need to just explain this better. That's what we need to do. So we do have, like I said, with I think it's up to 9, 10, maybe 11 research installations and one private agritourism site. Our communities just have yet to collaborate, and really that's just, I think, a lack of policy and a lack of incentives. People see this as being very much in academics still, and it isn't. It doesn't have to be. Working with the University of Minnesota, prior to working with the University of Minnesota, we did set up relationships with a solar developer and a local energy cooperative, so that we had space and land to work with, as well as the laboratories at the university. And so when we did get that collaboration started with the university, we were able to bring student teams and graduate student teams on board and have something tangible to share with them. So once you have a team together, getting that funding is not hard. But without putting those proper teams together and without having people have really having any incentive to be part of these teams is difficult. So that is what we found. And that is what I'm hoping to change a little bit by sharing some of this with you, because if anybody has an interest in collaborating on a project or doing it on your own, I would love to, help out in any way possible. because I have had struggles with putting together these projects over the last 2 years, and we are back to our first deployment coming up this summer. And we have some funny stories from the last deployment, but and those were definitely related to use of land use. Who wanted to use the land and when? We had everybody was very eager to get in and show off that they are committed to all types of agrivoltaics. So we had to share the land with solar grazing, which was a surprise. And also, we weren't making any pasture land. So, yeah. So sometimes, sometimes we have to explain things a lot more thoroughly before those collaborations are put into place, or people can run off with their own ideas and say, we can do all three at once. All right. So why? Yeah, we don't really need this in here, as I didn't go into too much of the policy. But yeah, why implement in the US? We do have inadequate policies supporting collaboration, and the US Midwest has a huge reliance on cash crops, which is a lot of the resistance that we're seeing, is that we rely so much on cash crops, and even changing our smallholder farming styles will end up having an impact on our national and multinational food supply chain, especially if these installations continue to grow. So yeah, basically inadequate policy. And so why are we going to do it anyway? Because doing it anyway is what is going to get us policy. And we're not going to take that break, because I'm going to ask you for a lot of feedback coming up. So what we focused on are open air projects for existing Minnesota solar sites. These are some examples of our, this is me and getting to learn SketchUp, and some other engineering programs. So these are models of a few different sites that we have taken a look at, and basically what we have gone through for each site. And I'll just give you a minute to kind of go through and read that. And then we can go ahead and move on. So I can't see the slide, but basically we started with the idea of sustainable farming. And as we did our research into both installing new systems, agrivoltaic systems, and installing agricultural systems with existing solar sites, we found that the no-till methodology was going to work out much better in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of irrigation, and in terms of crop yield, despite having higher labor costs. So I know that was going to be, that was our first question too, was, is this feasible because of the higher labor costs? And the answer is yes, it definitely is. It does have higher labor costs, but those are definitely offset by the either increased yield and savings in water, and then also energy production. So increased energy production. What we were looking at mostly were existing solar sites. So that was looked at as increased energy production rather than, new energy production. So underneath sustainable farming, we chose polycultures, and underneath polycultures, we chose companion planting and intercropping as a means of actually putting them in the ground. And then we included agroforestry. And so when this is generally included in agrivoltaic sites, it is included for the purposes of windbreaking, maybe as a replacement for fencing. It is also used kind of as root barriers, so for sectioning. But if you look at other videos, they will tell you, there's not enough space to use between panels, or there's not enough, space to use underneath panels. So agroforestry can come into play in some other ways in agrivoltaics. And our studies have shown that we can do a lot underneath the low solar panels that you see already installed. So we have done lab and greenhouse studies so far on growing different types of mushrooms. both like the log style, which you would put in the shadiest part of where that solar panel is, as well as having small, kind of small open greenhouse stackable things where we can stack the straw, like smaller straw bales in there. And then also hanging bags, hanging straw bags that you can inoculate. So those would be, a pretty high income crop for this area. And all of those have proven very well, through the greenhouse and labs. And we're very excited because those are going in to our project late summer this year. So we'll actually get to see it on the ground. And also there is a number of medicinal herbs. I have those are in some later slides that can grow that are also very high value crops. And so this would actually, be great because we would not be depleting our forest areas as much. And we would be able to bring agroforestry and some of those crops into a more traditional farm setting. So this is just a kind of all of these, what polycultures, intercropping, and companion planting are. Companion planting, I love talking about because everybody thinks it's very cool that plants have friends and foes, just like we have friends and foes. But yeah, none of these practices are new, but they are all sustainable. So there are a lot of farming methodologies suitable to agrivoltaics, and that does include greenhousing, which I did not put on here, so I wanted to just add that one. But yeah, agroforestry and food forests, urban agriculture, we can do this on rooftops. You can do this in small corners in cities. So this does not always have to be on it doesn't have to be 5 or 40 acres or even an acre. So there's a lot of different things. We've seen studies that have done this with hydroponics and aquaponics. This is definitely great for specialty crops and heirloom varieties. And of course, regenerative farming, which kind of encompasses a lot of that. So what do we consider with farming methodologies? And these are some things you can kind of read through yourself. And so these are actually what we're starting with are the most suitable crops for Minnesota. So these are what will be kind of going in, and I'll show you those a little bit later in the presentation, the mushrooms, root crops, leafy crops, herbs, medicinal forest plants, and some of those lettuces and other things. So those are the first things that are, that are very suitable, that are going to help with the soil restoration. And then in the spring, we're going to be putting in a much larger variety of plants that should be able to grow at that point. Biological regulation. Okay. So yeah, this is probably not new to this group at all. So I'm not giving you a lot of new information here, but this is all applicable to agrivoltaics, just as it would be to any other practice of sustainable farming. So, including pollinator plants, including insectivores. Same thing with plant competition and companionship and plant and soil microbes. So let's see. So yeah, biological regulation, these would be the methodologies that you would use. And let's see. So yeah, nutrition and balance is something that you're going to see in almost every solar site. So every site that we took sampling from had some level of soil compaction from when it had been made and had been of soil organic matter. And a lot of that has to do with the length of time that these solar sites have been there and have not had any growth underneath them. So if it is a newer solar site, you won't see quite as much of that, but any site is going to have some of that. So we saw a lot of site soil compaction, a lot of depleted soil, which is why we are starting later in the summer this year and moving into full crops next year. So our site has very low organic matter, very high calcium levels, low boron levels, and moderate soil compaction, moderate to high soil compaction. And so these are the crops we selected. So you see the fall. A lot of those are just companion plants to the ones that were listed before. And then spring, much longer list there.
Where is
this is in Northfield.
Oh,
Yeah. So, yeah. So this obviously varies a lot from what you see in some of the farms that have been around in the Southwest for a few years. Well, they can grow all of these things, and some of them do. They obviously keep they keep their growing zones in mind when you're looking at agrivoltaics, but it does leave a lot of room to grow a lot of different things together. And like I said, with no-till and hand harvesting, there is there's just a lot more possibility for growing a lot more varieties at once. Right. So, yeah. So for tomatoes, you can tell we have multiple different types that we're going to be growing. The same thing with, I think, lettuces and squash, which we wouldn't be able to do if we were not doing this in a polyculture setting. So soil coverage. This was something we looked at, and this should have probably gone before the plants, but this is something we looked into very heavily just because we wanted to start off our first growing season without having to do too much soil restoration ahead of time. That's not going to happen, but it was a nice idea. So we looked really, really heavily into living mulch or ground cover as an option. And I do think that it is a really good option for agrivoltaics and a lot of other sustainable farming systems, but probably not until after the first 2 years, at least if you are working with soil that needs to be heavily restored. Otherwise, we are working with perennial pollinator plants and off-season cover crop to start. And then hopefully we'll be moving into some experimentation with living mulch and ground cover. So our expected outcomes after 24 months are going to be a 60% increase in total carbon, 80% in total organic matter increase, and 5% in panel efficiency increase. And these panels are, sorry, these pictures didn't show very well because I'm just kind of cropped out a little bit of them, but these panels are at a 30-degree angle, and they are their lowest point, they are 2.5 feet off the ground. So these are pretty low panels, but they do offer room towards the back of each panel, and there is enough room in the row spacing. Even though it is a traditional site, there's enough room in that row spacing to grow quite a few different rows of 3 feet or more. So why don't we go back a little bit and get you some of your ideas on farming methodologies, plants. Or maybe we can go back up here a little bit and talk about some of the things that may be beneficial to our local communities. All right, well, addressing multiple public health issues. So agrivoltaics not only will provide a sustainable sourcing for local food sourcing or sustainable sourcing for food, energy, and water, it also will address kind of those food deserts where, it can address those food deserts. It can address the economics of smallholder farmers, and it can address the issues of employment. So it really addresses a lot of major public health issues. And then we're learning more. As we learn more, it's addressing also nutritional value of food. And then it is also basically the health of food without having to go through have all of the distribution channels when you're looking at, national or multinational chains, or even, region to region chains of food. It really cuts out, a lot of the health risks of food transportation. Right. So what was I going to ask? So local food sourcing, that's one thing that we did a lot of surveys over the summer. And local food sourcing is something that almost everybody that we talk to at a variety of different locations. So those that were shopping at farmers markets, those that were shopping at Costco, those that were, we did a lot of kind of community surveying on different topics, and almost everybody supports local food sourcing. And I know that's one of the main goals of this extension program, is to help with local food sourcing. But one interesting thing was nobody really knew why, other than supporting local farmers. So what are some other reasons why local food sourcing is important? Yep, exactly. Transportation and energy issues. So when we can have our own energy here and we can have our own food here, we don't have those transportation and those energy issues. That's fantastic. And there are some other great things from local food sourcing as well. Any other ideas? Yep. Exactly. Yep. Employment. So you are getting your food from your friends, your family, your neighbors, your community. All right. So I think those are good. And has anybody worked in any pollinator habitats or worked with soil restoration in general? Well, with our studies into soil regeneration, we took a look at quite a lot of different things. Right now, I don't have a slide for it, never mind. But right now we are in the process of finishing up our overwinter composting, which is site specific. And so we are trying out three different types and a separate type for the mushroom inoculation. But our three different types of composting are alpaca waste, mixed with mulch or mixed with leaf mulch, and food waste and vermicomposting. And so these are site specific because they were taken from neighboring crop residue. So neighboring crop residue, and these are in my backyard. For reference, not everything fits in the lab or on a site. So this has been fun. My neighbors love it. Yes. Thank you.
And I'm just curious, what would it mean? They have plants and we have numbers.
Right.
I'm thinking of the cost of getting started with other plants that are available to, like, say, our school or something.
Unfortunately, there are not at this point. We would love to see policy change, but we have not had an issue finding funding once we have collaborative partners involved. So we find that communities will support this and will provide the funding. It is, it's not set in stone, but for our last project that was planned for last year that rolled over into this year, which we had to set new partnerships up with, it was very easy to get funding through local community support and city support too. So it depends on the location. You can get support through the utility. A lot of times it's the utility will support it. Cities will support it.
Well, I'm thinking in particular of garden, and I'm wondering, is there someone that they could contact that would work with them if they were interested?
Yep. Well, they can certainly reach out to us at Intellect Earth, and we've been very good at putting together teams so far, and can, probably we would reach out to the you, who may reach out to some of you, and we would be forming a new team. It's a project by project environment for us. Yes.
I have a question about the
Yep. A cost barrier? Not particularly. What we have what we have found is, I mean, what we've chosen for our site, because it is very flat, we looked at both slope and drip irrigation. So we've chosen a drip irrigation system, and those are fairly inexpensive. Ours comes right out of the box. It's a DIY that can fit up to 50 acres. But yeah, it came from Home Depot. So it's not, it's, yeah.
So for a small setup.
For a small setup, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it gets to be bigger. But yeah, I mean, if you're running something, we're running on 4 acres. So, you know, it's still quite a large area. But yeah, it's going to vary from project to project on cost, materials, location, what those needs are. You know, there's a lot of mapping involved too. So, you know, some sites are just not great for agrivoltaics. There's too much going on underneath the ground. Some of the older solar sites just don't have things buried deep enough. So, you know, there's a lot of considerations that come into play. So for this, we're using a drip irrigation system, and that's probably what's recommended for most agrivoltaic settings. But again, it's going to change from setting to setting. And it's going to change as the climate changes as well. So we feel that this is, you know, a pretty safe model to go off of. You know, this is still professional industrial grade materials. They're not going to go away anytime soon after setup. Yeah, but that is a very good question. So yeah, we're looking at drip irrigation that we can really monitor in real time and control. Yes.
That have solar panels now?
It does. It has solar panels in it now that are low to the ground, that are at a 30-degree angle, that are at their lowest point 2.5 feet off the ground. So this is really one of the lowest sites that we've seen. We start with the hardest project first.
Looks like, yes, they're in the shadow of the solar panel. They're actually planted between solar panels.
Kind of. I would use the upper image really to get an idea of the tilt of the panel. But yes, I mean, it is really in the shade, as you can see up there. That shade from the top solar panel reaches almost to where you see that light in the front of the next solar panel. And those are modeled into really great detail. I wish I could just jump into my SketchUp right now because it's kind of fun, and then we could turn it around and show all of the degrees. But yeah, we put together even a book of growing degree days for last year and this year that showed the sunlight and the panel changes in animation. For one of our students put it together, and it was wonderful. So that was great. I kind of wish I had that to flip through, because that would just show you the shading right away on each of these different types of plants, which I tried to make as realistic as possible. Yes.
Okay. Do you have quite a bit more to go yet, Marta? We also have several questions on the chat line, so maybe if we
let's I'll go through the last few slides and then we'll go through questions. Okay. All right. So last few slides here. So this is just about our data monitoring. So we have built a drone-based data monitoring system specifically for APV environments that monitors both the sustainable agriculture activity as well as the solar array performance. So this is it's a DJI 300 Matrice. It's got ground penetrating radar. It has a near infrared. It has a lot of sensors attached to it, as well as a high optical visual camera. And oops, why can't I get that? There. So these are our data metric. These are the metrics that our drone picks up, or shows. So it'll show the current climate condition, your current energy yield, surface soil moisture, our growing degree days, ground irradiance, soil water content, panel efficiency, solar soiling levels, solar self-sufficiency, solar temperature degradation. I know some of these are things that really don't fall under the agricultural part, but they are still pertinent to the farm itself. And then we get into actually monitoring the plants through plant reflectance, visual plant health, monitoring insects and pests, biomass and plant cover. Underneath that should say plant biomass. Leaf chlorophyll is a little bit covered up there, as is, I don't know, another metric there.
Organic carbon.
Yep.
Plant yield estimation.
Mm-hmm.
And ambient solar irradiance.
Yep, ambient solar irradiance. So these are all things that we want to kind of have at our fingertips at all times. We want to have that solar irradiance, know where that light is, know how much of it there is, and know how much of it is getting absorbed and by what. We want to know about the health of our plants. We want to know, all kinds of different things. So we can know this now in real time, and it will be very interesting, I think, for farms that are close together to be able to share their knowledge in real time. And then it's also just very helpful in general, even if you're not going to be using it in real time, for aggregation at the end and future farm planning. All right, we just went through this earlier. So what are we doing with all this data? Eventually, in 4 to 5 years, after we do have a significant amount of data, we would like to put together a secondary piece of software that helps as a planning software and a management software and a sharing software, so that it's not just a monitoring software that offers you some insight now and again. It will be something much more robust once we do have more data. And yes, so this is our dashboard now. It's not going to look as clunky forever, but there's no reason to really make it beautiful yet. But this is what we'll be doing. So you can look at it, you can end up looking at it from sections, by metric, by individual plant, by individual panel, how they're doing, zone in on it, and gather all of that data. And so once we get up and running and have actually flown over things other than snow, it will be it will be really fun to have some real data in here, and then we'll make it a little bit more user friendly. It's really simplistic. It just needs to be less boring. And yeah, we do see this as the next step in agriculture for our planet. So I think with that, we can wrap up and get to questions.
There was a question in the audience or over Zoom, and they are interested to find out when our legislators are going to be informed about this.
Well, I think they do already know about it, as last year was the first government grant that came out specifically for agrivoltaics from the Department of Energy, who the year before laughed at me and told me it had nothing to do with energy. But yes, I think that I think the legislature is well aware of agrivoltaics and its existence. There's just not enough popularity and not enough attention in the Midwest. And so that's where it comes into doing projects, like you mentioned, at a school, or doing projects within the community where we can fundraise through cities, through through institutions, and through our own communities to get these projects started, so that it does get to a point where those benefits are real, can be shown, can be seen by people who are in a position to make policy. Because we don't want to lobby. We don't want to be lobbyists, but we would like to be able to provide that data. And to provide that data, we need more installations, and we need to see this practice a little bit more prominent in Minnesota. It doesn't have to be large scale installations, but we would like to see as many as we can. I'm getting everything ready to launch at the beginning of 2024 for community education. So we've put together, or are putting together, both a video series and then an educational series for K through 12 teachers, that can be a class, or can be taught in the classroom. And then beyond that, we would like to continue, or actually we would like to start doing more public speaking. So this is actually a little bit early for us on the education side, coming out to speak today. Like I said, this is the first time that I have publicly spoke to this topic, even though I've been working in it for 3 years. And yes, education is one of our top priorities. And so we're hoping to have that set and ready for next spring around this time. Rooftops, and because that's another area that we can look at for smaller projects throughout Minnesota. And then greenhouses coming up after that. Solar developers and some utilities are extremely excited and very happy. And some are exactly the opposite. And the same goes with farmers. So it's very mixed. It's been easy to gather that excitement. It has been difficult to, to actually get things moving. Collaborations will take a little bit more time to work out, but we worked it out again with same players, and we'll figure it out. But as the smallest player, yes, it is difficult at this time. Yes, we have gone through the cost benefit analysis. So initial upfront costs are an issue because you are transitioning how somebody is farming. So that is always there's going to be consulting fees, equipment fees, maybe a loss in production for a year or two. It depends on, what we're coming from. So either, we have to plan for those upfront costs, but overall, farmers who already have community solar installed are are compensated well and would then see an increase of 26 to 30% above what they're already making on their solar leases. And that is if they take the income and work the land. If they don't, and they choose to have a secondary lease, we have to work with the solar developer to see if they will let us do that. Some of the cooperative utilities, we've had some great feedback. They just want to make sure that when these projects come up, they're not the ones who are going to be paying for them because it is still in a pilot phase. But like I said, we did end up with just a mishmash of community and academic funding. And I think that, I don't see a lot of barriers to that coming up again, especially when we can come in and also use this as a teaching practice. So when we came in with a team from the University of Minnesota, a team of students, from the University of Minnesota, we're using it as a teaching practice. We're using it as a pilot for a new way of farming. When all of these factors come together, there are a lot of smaller funding aspects that we can then push together, to make these projects happen. People can still keep farming the way that they are farming if they would like to, and those who would like to try the transition can try the transition. And that's why we put on there, this is very good for certain farmers and it may not be the best choice for others. Although a lot of people do think installing over our currently productive farmlands over traditional farmland and allowing them to continue their traditional farming would also be just as effective. That's just simply not the route that our company was going to take.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. And I know we have several questions out on the chat yet, but I think perhaps if we can maybe get those on a list and get those to you for some follow-up, Martha, would that be all right with you? Okay, so we'll take that approach. This is a great topic, a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions. And so let's all thank Marta very much for the